Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Consciousness Cafe. We're going to be talking tonight about spiritual emergencies. And we have an expert with us here, Elizabeth J. Sabet from Texas, who's going to be talking to us about spiritual emergence and emergencies. And I know that can take a number of different forms, from just having the experience itself to dealing with that and the after effects of it, but also dealing with people who don't understand what you went through and some of the pain and agony of being ostracized or dismissed or not believed for the things that happened to you. So we'll talk about that this evening. And to introduce Elizabeth, I told her before the meeting, there's a section of her webpage, and I put her webpage up in the chat, and I'll put that on YouTube when the YouTube video goes up. But she grew up in Northeast Minnesota, and I just loved the description she talked about as growing up as a child. And I think it really lends itself to the foundation that she has when she talks about what she does, because and Elizabeth, you can elaborate on this. I really feel like one of the key things to being good at this area of, I guess, psychology or coaching is to know yourself. And you have to know who you are if you want to be able to help other people. And then one of the benefits of transformational coaching, which we'll talk about at the end as well, is you have to know yourself to know where you want to go or what you want to do. So I'll read this introduction. Now, I have edited it down, but if you go to Elizabeth's website, you can read the full thing. So it says, my appreciation for life was nurtured by the rapidly flowing Kettle River and the dense forests of Northeast Minnesota, where I spent my childhood. In the late 1960s and 1970s, the forests of Minnesota were a safe place for children to play free and undisturbed. And we would roam out there for miles and miles every day. I love that part. Often in the summer, we would pack a sack lunch in the morning and play in the woods all day long. These woods were alive with animal life: rabbits, deer, raccoons, wildcats, and bears. Yes, wildcats and bears, but they never harmed us. I enjoyed sitting on a rock outcropping that went over the river, and from there we could watch bald eagles as they soared over the tall pines. In the wintertime, my school's physical education class would go to a nearby nature preserve where we would learn how to live off the land. The teachers there taught us how to make a stove with a coffee can and a candle, and how to make soup out of snow and dried vegetables. At the age of 5, I began experiencing nonlinear realities which I could not explain to adults, much less comprehend myself, until much later in life. I'm sure it was the sacredness of those northern woods, rivers, and lakes that helped me stay grounded in the world despite all the input from the nonlinear realms. And with that, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Sabet, and we'll go from there. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh, thank you so much. I forgot about writing that. I wrote that so long ago. So thank you for bringing those images and bringing that place back to me so viscerally tonight. Yeah, so I've had lots of experiences throughout my life, and very organically throughout my adult life. I was brought into service, community service in Lubbock, Texas, to support other people who were going through transformations or didn't feel like they fit into the world anymore, or fit into their traditional world anymore, or were confused about the traditional world and the new values that they were developing, or new awarenesses that they were coming to as well, based on some people who had experiences, some people who were just curious about why they felt like they no longer connected with their religion of birth or origin. And so through our community development work in Lubbock, that lasted over 10 years, and that is what brought me to spiritual emergence and emergency work. I did not come to it on my own. I wasn't necessarily kicking and screaming by that time. I knew that it was my work to do, and that I was to do whatever I felt like God put in front of me. And that one of our community members who had had a very transformative experience spiritually She was a very staunch Christian, and she had an experience that broadened her experience of Jesus and of Christianity that did not fit into her world.
Mm.
And I'm sharing her experience because she's given me the permission to share her experience. But her experience with her family was pivotal in the work that I'm doing now. She came to me and she brought me the book from Stanislav and Christina Groff called The Stormy Search for Self. And she said, you need to read this book, and Hope, which is the name of the organization, she said, needs to do something about this. You need to do something. Because what was happening to her in her marriage of 32 years was that her husband and her children thought she was psychotic, wanted her seen by a psychiatrist and admitted to a hospital. And she couldn't find a therapist here in town who understood anything that she was going through. And I started reading the book, and it was very hard for me to read it because so much of it mimicked my experience and of not being able to communicate what was falling apart inside of me as I had experiences later in life. And then through that work, we found Dr. Janice Holden, who's now the president of IANS. And I told her that I wanted to host an academic conference here in Lubbock, Texas, and train as many mental health professionals as I could get in the door. And she graciously came to Lubbock and did that training for us for free. So if any of you know Dr. Janice Holden, she is a dear woman as well as a brilliant researcher and educator, and now community supporter for IANS as well. Such a beautiful hearted woman. And she connected me to Yolaine Stout, who was the founder of ASSIST, the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences. And then I later became a board member of ASSIST, and then trained the peer support group facilitators for ASSIST and organized their academic conferences for them. And so I served with Hope for 10 years and ASSIST for 6. And now I'm just on my own doing my work kind of solo right now.
Yeah. Well, and Elizabeth, you sell yourself a little bit short here. You spent a lot of time doing education for ASSIST and for other groups too. And it wasn't just little day-long workshops. These were things that were pretty extensive as well. And could you talk about that as part of your history and your experience leading up to what we're going to talk about tonight?
Yeah, so I organized the academic conferences, and there was training for mental health professionals at all of those conferences. We tried to do them annually or at least every other year. I also was invited to teach about spiritual ethics to therapists here in Lubbock, Texas, for a Texas Tech Family Marriage Family Therapy Symposium. We trained 125 therapists here in Lubbock, and stood up in front of therapists in conservative West Texas and talked about Kundalini and near death and out of body and potential alien contact as a potential spiritually transformative experience. And that was interesting as well. And trained meditation instruction at the Health Sciences Center at Texas Tech University. And I also am a coaching educator and have my own coaching institute where I do teach spiritual integration coaching as well. Teach people about the different categories and types of experiences and how to work with them as a coach.
Yeah. Now the coaching programs too, they take weeks or months or even years to go through, depending on what they are, right?
Depending on the level of education of somebody in their history, it does take months to a year and a half. Yeah.
Okay. And I know I jumped ahead when we started talking about all this, but let's talk about spiritual emergencies and spiritual emergence. And is there a difference between spiritual emergence or the awakening of someone spiritually and a spiritual emergency? And then what are the different types of spiritual emergencies that people may have or experience?
Yes, actually, I have a pretty good set of slides to go over that goes over that.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if you want me to do that, because I do differentiate a spiritual emergence process, a spiritual emergency, and a spiritually transformative experience, and where these terms came from, who brought them to us. And because what we're wanting to do tonight, right, is how to recognize a spiritual emergency. And there is somebody could be in a state of emergency, but you wouldn't know it because they're functional to a degree,
Hmm.
but internally they're in a state of emergency. They're just trying to hold it together or look normal, but there's a lot going on inside.
Well, that's good. Let's look at the slides then.
Sure. If you want to let me share my screen, and I think I have to be.
You are. You can go ahead
I
right
am.
now. Uh-huh.
I can. Okay. Okay. So I just have to. If I start the presentation right away, then I can't get into it. See the rest of you. Okay. So Mark, just jump in. Okay.
Hmm.
And just interrupt me as we move forward. And I'm going to hide these controls here. So, all right. So tonight I want to talk about what is a spiritual emergency, a spiritual emergence, STE, spiritually transformative experience, and some statistics. And we're going to talk about why they happen, some indicators, some subtle indicators, and then how to provide support either as a spiritual friend or a professional. And we're going to differentiate support as a spiritual friend and professional support as well. Does that sound okay?
Hmm. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So you are probably all familiar with Dr. Stanislav Grof. He is the person who has written about spiritual emergency and coined the term spiritual emergency. So what I've done is just included his definition of a spiritual emergency. So he states it can be defined as a critical and experientially difficult stages of profound psychological transformation that involves one's entire being. And so I'll kind of fast forward. He said that these episodes, and you notice the term episode here, these episodes often revolve around spiritual themes and may include sequences of psychological death and rebirth, um, feelings of oneness with universe, and encounters with various mythological beings and other similar motifs. So that term episode is going to be really important as we move forward. And some of you may be familiar with Dr. Emma Bragdon. She has coined the term spiritual emergence and has been a leader in the field of research and providing support for decades. She's one of the founders of the spiritual emergence movement. And she states spiritual emergence is the process of personal awakening into a level of perceiving and functioning which is beyond normal ego functioning. So it's beyond that normal known self. Okay. She states among the positive effects of this process are increased creativity, feelings of peace, and an expanded sense of compassion.
Mhm.
And assist started working with the term spiritually transformative experience. So when you get involved with this field, you're going to hear these three terms back and forth, and some people may use them interchangeably. So I thought it was really important to first discuss those basic terms that you might hear often. So assist defines a spiritually transformative experience when it causes people to perceive themselves in the world profoundly differently by expanding the individual's identity, augmenting their sensitivities, meaning they feel things differently or sense things differently than they did prior to the experience, thereby altering their values or priorities and appreciation for the purpose of life. So yeah, I just wanted to go over those different uh, definitions, Mark. So
Mhm.
I don't know if you have any conversation around that or questions around that.
I'm pretty good.
Okay.
I've always thought of spiritual emergence as being something that was more controlled, and a spiritual emergency is when you kind of feel like you have no control over what's going on. And I didn't know if that would be a way to simplify it or not.
It is, and it's a good way to simplify it. Somebody going through spiritual emergence that is functional, right, where they feel
Mhm.
like they're controlling it, may still have a great deal of challenge to deal with. And we'll talk about some of those challenges as well. And if those challenges don't get taken care of, if they're not attended to, then it can turn into a spiritual emergency later on.
And that's a good point. And I'm glad you're going to talk about it.
Yeah,
Mm.
we are. So this is these experiences are more common than some people may have thought. So looking at the research through the Pew Research Fund and also Gallup, there's 51% of the American population that have had no reported experience, but 49% have. So that's pretty phenomenal, I think. And I thought it would be interesting to take a look at those numbers over the years. And you can see from 62 to 2009, the huge jump. Now, why is that? There are all sorts of theories about why that is. It could be that it's become more acceptable to talk about them and
Mhm.
to not hide them. It could be because consciousness is evolving. It could be because of the introduction of Eastern philosophies at a greater cultural level in the 60s, where we had access. But then you see the bigger jump after the internet as well was introduced into our daily lives in the early 90s, right?
Yep.
So it could be that accessibility of information and people's freedom to explore beyond their enculturated life experience and familial and cultural upbringing, because you can study this stuff in private now, right? You can sit on your computer or your phone, and your mom and dad or your husband or wife doesn't have to know what you're doing, what you're looking at. So we are exposed to more information as well.
Yeah. We can talk about this later, but I just wanted to ask right at this point, is it affecting children more now than in the past? Because you've heard people talk about indigo children and rainbows and crystals, and supposedly that this generation of children that have been born in the last 5 to 10 years are going to have more spiritual abilities. Is there anything true? Does anything ring true to that? And are they having any spiritual emergence or emergencies as a result?
I don't know that anybody's keeping track of those numbers. There's a really good book called The Secret Spiritual Lives of Children by Dr. Tobin Hart, Hart. And that was written I think that was written in 2013, 2014. And he and his wife had extensive experience at supporting children and families of children who had experiences, but I don't think that we have any numbers on those that I'm currently aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, but great question, because many of these experiences do start in childhood, and they're either told that they had a dream or it's their imagination, and it gets shut down. But in my experience, that if it's nurtured properly and a parent knows how to nurture a child's spiritual awareness properly, that it can become their greatest asset instead of a problem.
Mm,
Yeah.
great.
So just to look at some old research from ASSIST on the potential critical consequences of people who had reported spiritually transformative experiences. And now remember that many of these people were near-death experiencers, and many of from this research, and that many of those experiences were light-filled. Okay, so it's interesting that some of those potential critical consequences. There was a 6.7 suicide attempt rate, some of them successful, of course, unfortunately, a 10% substance abuse rate, and a 50% had issues with depression and anxiety. Even with the light-filled, I went to heaven and saw light and had this great experience of love. And then a 67 to 75% divorce rate. That was the range of divorces depending on the population. And so you can see that even having a glorious light-filled experience of spirit does not mean that you're going to have an easy time after the experience. There's other factors that we don't have data for, and that's spiritual abuse and exploitation. And one of the problems or the challenges of transcendence or spiritual experience is that people can become very loving, and they love everybody and everything, and they have looser boundaries, and they don't recognize danger because they are in states of love, and they can be abused and exploited by people who take advantage of them. You know, we've seen cases of it from being, a local minister to people who are trying to sell programs to, just you name it. One form of exploitation are people that are using experiencer stories for writing books, but then what's happened in some really bad cases is that the experiencer shared their experience with somebody who was writing a book or an article, and then they no longer owned their experience, and they couldn't tell their experience in public anymore because they didn't own it, and they didn't understand that they were signing away their rights to tell their story. So
yeah, and I wanted to ask one thing about the divorce rate, because I know that's very, very high. And I wanted to just mention that is because you have one partner who has had this change in worldview. They've had this tremendous experience. It's totally changed the way they look at life. And it didn't happen with their partner, the other partner, or with their family, their friends, or community. And that's really one of the really tough parts about having a spiritual experience. But especially in the case of partners, is when one person shares or doesn't share the same worldview as the other, that can really lead to a lot of strife and a lot of pain. I know some couples that have done a good job of this, and others who they seem to be holding it together, but I know that there's some stresses and strains in there. But I guess I wanted to put my heart out to everybody who has that problem. But if there's some things that could help relationships when one person has a spiritual experience and another one hasn't, if you could share some of that, that would be great.
yeah, it's really unfortunate, isn't it? And what I hope to see us moving towards is a clearer understanding of how to help couples communicate. One of the advice that a colleague of mine has is to have the experiencer practice compassion for the non-experiencing partner, because they didn't have the gift of the experience that they had. And so to have compassion, being willing to listen to the non-experiencer partner, and to find where you can what I call the work of the third alternative, and helping couples find a third alternative. Now, sometimes, like we said earlier, I think, before we turn on the camera, that people don't want to talk about these things because it scares them. And so it takes a great deal of courage and willingness and humility on both partners' part to sit with the pain and the confusion and the fear and the suffering of both partners, to find the third alternative of what could be possible as they integrate not only the person's experience, but the change as well. And I think that as people that have been together successfully for a very long time will tell you that, you're going to see the best and the worst part of this person. And you're going to meet parts of this person that they didn't even know that they had. And if we could begin to teach people that, young people, that when they're in relationship, like, you're going to meet somebody they didn't even know that they were. And how do you prepare for that? So, yeah, it's
Good.
tough.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I know that's a really big thing with a lot of people, and a lot of couples don't talk about it. If one person has had any kind of spiritual experience that's changed their worldview, it's really caused a lot of harm or a lot of issues and concerns.
That's right. And it would point to the level of emotional safety that's already in a relationship. And the reality is that nobody trains us to be in a relationship. We get our training from our childhood and as to how to be in a relationship. And we could use this experience of one person having one partner having the experience as an opportunity to become more emotionally illiterate, to be more compassionate, to choose oneness, to choose love, and to ask the question, what would love do in this situation, right? And how would love listen to this? And so hopefully we'll have more marriage and family therapists becoming interested and educated about how to support couples in this situation,
Yeah,
have these difficult conversations.
that's a good point. Thanks.
Yeah. 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 So I have included a couple of lists of spiritual experiences, and I'm going to blow them up here. But I think, Mark, I included those. If you want to put them in the chat, I'm going to
They
blow
are.
them up. Okay, they are in the chat. Okay, great. So I'm going to blow this up. I know it's not great, but this abbreviated list of what's called exceptional human experiences comes from the work of Rhea Wright, and the website is ehe.org. Now, this website, I think, is dead. I don't think that it's been kept up since her passing, but this is in a very abbreviated list of spiritual experiences, or what she called exceptional human experiences. You can see it only goes to E here on the screen. The original had, I think, 126 or 125 experiences. So it's always fun to give this to people and who think they've never had any type of spiritual experience or exceptional human experience or peak experience, to say, hey, have you ever had this? So one of the things that the chart here on is, how frequent did it happen? How often did it happen? And then also, what was the impact on your life? Did it have no impact, or did it have a very strong impact on your life? And so if you're going to work with someone professional, you could give them this list and say, here's my history, right? It's a great little tool to use. And if you are a professional here, I got this from Dr. Holden, Dr. Janice Holden, and she used it at our conferences as well. And there are so many different types of experiences. It would blow your mind if you're not, schooled about the different types. But the things that the nonlinear, non-normative experiences that people have are vast. And one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is, how do you know it's a spiritual experience or it's a true state of psychosis? And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. There is a great mystical experience questionnaire here as well, and I'll blow that up, but that should be in your chat as well. And you can see some of the ways people experience the these types of experiences over here to the left. So some of the ways that people experience it here, a loss of a usual sense of time, an experience of amazement. You may think, an experience of amazement, how is that, a mystical experience? But some people have, it's like time has stopped and they're connecting with the details of even an inanimate object in such an expanded
Mm.
way that it is an amazement beyond your your traditional, oh, that's amazing type of thing. It's a true immersion experience in being amazed at the beauty of life, even perhaps in an inanimate object. Um, Sense that the experience cannot be described adequately in words, we call that ineffable. A gain of insight or knowledge or insightful knowledge experienced at an intuitive level. Feelings that you experienced eternity or infinity. So it just goes on and on. So knowing what a how mystical experiences have been languaged by the experiencer are really helpful. Okay, as you, if you're going to be supporting somebody in the experience.
Yeah. And let me just add, this is probably why your classes or the courses or the coaching courses take so long, it's just so complex and so varied. And I think it's beyond even what anybody on the call can understand, except you, since you've been
Oh, no. I wouldn't say that. I bet there's a lot of people on this call that have had some experiences that could probably describe it better than me because I haven't had all of them. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, it is complex. And I just had somebody, one of my current students, tell me last week that they have a friend that's going to school to become a therapist who said that their program is not as complex or comprehensive as what I'm doing with the ITTC group. So I'm trying to get this thing out of the way. But so how do these things happen? What happens? What causes them? Yeah, I'm having a problem. Is there a way to hide this thing? Oh, there we go. Because I know it'll. So how can these things happen, whether it's an emergency or a gentle emergence, or something that was really transformative? Spiritual and devotional practices can cause it. So being very devoted, just the act of being devoted to God, that's it. Just a true and sincere devotion to God, to truth, to life, to beauty. A sincere devotion creates an opening in the soul that allows for truth to arise, and sometimes arise in a way and be experienced in a way that you're not expecting. Some people intentionally engage spiritual and devotional practices to have an experience, and they really have a hard time. And there's all sorts of challenges that we'll get into about that. But you can be diagnosed with an illness or a disease or any type of physical imbalance. Stress and trauma can cause them as well. Sex and childbirth both have been known to precipitate a spiritual experience. And of course, a sudden accident can also cause them. Psychedelic use can also create, and does often create, an opening and an awareness that cannot be easily integrated back into the normal state of mind. So, of course, we know about the near death and then shared death experience. So, a shared death experience, of course, is when you are experiencing someone's death or an aspect of someone's death as they're going through the death process. A near-death like experience is having all of the elements of the experience of a near-death experience, but not actually having had a brush with death. Okay. And then failed suicide attempts can also create spiritual emergencies or a spiritual experience of some kind. And then we have to add now artificial intelligence into the mix of how these things can happen. So people are having conversations with chat GPT and different, there's all sorts of different AI chats out there now. And they're unfortunately telling people some really dangerous things and that are causing people to be shocked and into a state of potential disassociation. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, these artificial intelligence protocols have access to all information. And so they can be spitting out spiritual truths to people that people are not ready for. And the difference between AI and a very ethical spiritual teacher, a spiritual teacher would never, an ethical spiritual teacher would never divulge all of the spiritual information at all levels to a student in one sitting. The spiritual teacher, an ethical spiritual teacher or minister or priest or rabbi, is going to know their student and to know the strength of their consciousness and to know their level of development and to know what can be safely integrated. They would not just dump all of this information that may be true at one level, but it's not at another. And then what happens is it creates this exact same type of spiritual emergency experience that happens from all of these other ways as well. Now, very often, there's no apparent precipitating event. They spontaneously occur. And so it's really important, whether you're a spiritual friend that's helping somebody, or if you're a professional, that you don't tell people, oh, you had this because that happened, because that may be true and it may not be true. And what's more important is to have the experiencer come to their own understanding about what happened. And that may take time. Part of the challenge is being very confused about what is happening and why it's happening. Yeah. So there's some psychological and spiritual reasons that people have had, reasons or meanings. So some people understand that the soul is comprised of the mind, the will, and the emotions. And the mind, the will, and the emotions are in a constant state of development. We don't stop developing because we're 92. We have the opportunity to continue to develop our soul for as long as we're alive in these physical bodies. And many people believe that we have the opportunity to develop the soul beyond this physical life, that this physical life is not the end of that soul development. Some people don't believe that, some people do. Some people have said that these experiences were the catalyst for their spiritual service. And many people find a calling and a work that they feel is theirs to do after the experience, and believe that that experience was meant to help them find that spiritual service, or that find their work in the world, some people will say. And then some people believe these experiences happen to connect them, to let them have an experience of divinity or a passed on loved one. And that what generally occurs is they receive grace and comfort, mercy, forgiveness, compassion, and love. Now, sometimes they don't, sometimes they can be disturbing. But ultimately, a lot of people believe that's what these experiences are for. So these are different psychological and spiritual reasons that people have had. So I'm wondering if you have any conversation about that, Mark, or any questions about that.
Well, I'd like to come back to the artificial intelligence thing at some point, when maybe in the questions or maybe in another discussion. But I think that's very interesting. I've never heard that one before. But I can see how, with artificial intelligence growing by leaps and bounds over the last 6 to 9 months, that causing problems that people may not be aware of. And
That's right.
I think this is one of them that I was not aware of.
Right. And the other thing is that that I wanted to say is that another reason that these things that different spiritual teachers will tell you is that the reason that it's happening is because the soul is now ripe for it.
Mm-hmm.
Soul has ripened to and received the merit, like they've done the work to clear away something, or their devotional practice has brought them the gift of this experience. Now, not all experiencers would classify their experience as a gift in the beginning because of the, very serious
Right.
challenges, right, that they experience. But eventually, if they have support and if they have support that helps them develop their own meaning and understanding and helps them learn how they want to move forward in their life, then it can be a great catalyst for um, uh, joy and happiness and fulfillment.
Right.
Yeah,
And I think the whole point of all this is to have this experience be a catalyst and not be a detriment or some complication in your life as well. And I think that's one of the outcomes that I hope we can leave this presentation with, is
absolutely.
work toward this being a catalyst and not a detriment.
That's
Or
right.
that your interaction with someone who's had an experience helps them and doesn't cause them harm.
That's right. That's the goal. That's the goal. Okay. Let me try to close this little thing. Okay. So here's some more what I call pronounced potential indicators of spiritual emergency or emergence. People will report having light episodes, meaning that they see light flashes, flashes of light, and they can generally be different colors. Some people believe that if they have a blue flash of color, that could mean that there's a non-linear other in the room, what you might call an entity, and it may not necessarily be a bad entity or a bad energy, but blue light might mean that. For some people, that's what they've discovered that means for them. Um, White light means it's a higher order, non-linear being. Or it means that they are perceiving beyond the 3D world, and they're seeing more of the light that envelops all of nature and all of life. So those are some of the meanings that have been attributed to light episodes. So I want to say, I want to preface this section with that all of these indicators could also be indicators of neurological problems, could be indicators of some hormonal imbalance in the body. They could also be indicators of a potential crisis of psychosis, and that you can have a spiritual experience along with a state of psychosis. They can be concomitant. So we'll get more on how to work with that later. But they can believe that they're a religious figure. They can believe that they're God, that they're Jesus. Now, it's very interesting with some of the research done on the Muslim experiences that when they have a near-death experience, they don't see Muhammad, because in their tradition, to worship Muhammad is considered sacrilegious. So they see the light and have an experience of God, but so far it's not reported with this little bit of research that's been done. So we can't say definitively that they don't have an experience of Muhammad, but it's not been reported so far that we know.
Right. And for the people who are non-Islamic, and happy Ramadan for people who are,
Yes.
is Muhammad was considered to be a prophet and not a deity. So that was another aspect of that, as opposed to Jesus, who was a deity and also a prophet. But
Thank
that's
you.
why some people say that and some people don't.
Thank you. Oh, that's a great reference, Mark. Thank you.
Mm.
There may be creative bursts where people become very creative, and they can sing or they can dance, they can write, create art, and need less sleep and less
Mm.
food. There might be communication with non-physical entities where they're talking to people without their skin and bones on, or other types of entities. They may have overwhelming heat or pain in the body, and this is seen frequently with people who are going through a Kundalini awakening.
Mm.
They can have what's called a crisis of psychic opening, to where they've become so empathic, they know what other people are feeling in their body. They can hear people's thoughts. They can see things, know things. They can have all those clairs that we experience, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience. Um, and there's more clair experiences, but that can be very disturbing for people, to hear a voice and not want to hear that voice, or to know something about somebody and find out it's true and be like, yeah, I need this to stop. Okay.
Right.
So some people are like, cool, I got psychic powers. And
Yeah.
others are like, please stop, somebody
Right.
please stop this for me. Yeah.
Now, in terms of what you were just talking about, I've talked to people who, in their teens and early 20s, have said, I prayed to say turn it off or whatever when they have these things. And I know when we're talking about these indicators of spiritual experiences, and you're talking to your friend or someone in the community, you may observe these things, but they won't necessarily overtly tell you that they've had these experiences. This is just some of the ways that you can intuit that, I guess.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So some other things are attributing spiritual significance to objects that others don't. And so, what that means is, all of the sudden, um, I don't know, this oil could save your life, right? This essential oil I have sitting on my desk all of a sudden may have more significance than other people might attribute to it, because they received some information about the meaning of that now it has more value than normal. Right. So difficult describing their experiences, but insight is still intact. So this is really important. So if somebody is in a state of psychosis, they will have difficulty describing their experience, but they may be in such a state that they don't understand that this isn't normal. There's all different ways that can manifest, where they lose insight, but it's even more pronounced than, I just don't understand what this means. It's that they know. So somebody will, somebody's not really, that is more likely in a state of acute spiritual emergency than perhaps one of the schizoaffective disorders, is when they say, the craziest thing happened to me, you're probably never going to believe what happened. Right. And they know, because they have that insight that this is not typical. Okay. Dr. Janice Holden taught differential diagnosis between psychosis and acute phase spiritual emergency at the University of North Texas. And some of this is coming from her work.
Mm.
Okay. So they will have an inability to work because they can't focus, they can't function. So in spiritual emergency, there is definitely a lack of functioning. If they tell you they've had a near-death experience, that there's no questioning about it, right? They're telling you they've had a near-death experience. It's very pronounced. An inability to socialize. So they may become so sensitive, or they become sensitive to light or to sound or to the energy of other people. They may be so scared, like, I don't know what's happening. I feel crazy. I don't feel normal. I'm trying to keep it together, but I don't feel okay. And I don't want anybody to know about it. Okay. And then disorganized speech. It could show up as speaking in tongues, or what we now call light language. They can have difficulty describing. They may be so affected and scared that they'll talk about something. They're talking about something and they forget what they're talking about, and then they move to another subject. So again, some of these indicators really can be indicators of what we would traditionally call a mental health disorder.
Mhm.
But it's important that they're not immediately dismissed as that. And that if you're a professional, that you learn how to understand the difference between one and the other, or when, especially in the case of trauma, where there might be some of both involved as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
So on inability to socialize, excuse me,
Mhm.
I've heard people say, oh, so and so's a recluse, or so and so is agoraphobic. That could be an indicator that they've had a spiritual experience that they can't tell anybody about. Would that be true?
It's possible. I would think that there would be some other indicators there and maybe something else going on. Um, and so it is possible. I would take a look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention. I mean, I've
Yeah.
actually had that come up in conversation when they talk about people and say, "Oh, they're a recluse." They have 24 cats in their house and they sit and play with their cats all day long, and that's it. So
Yeah,
you just wonder.
absolutely.
But and there's one lady I know in particular who actually had a lot of spiritual mojo going on, but she just couldn't relate to other people because they couldn't understand the experiences that she's had or the things
That's
that she talks about. Yeah.
that's right. And sometimes the effort of attempting to socialize and integrate into normal society is just too difficult.
Mm.
Yeah. It's not worth the effort. And it's not uncommon for people to go through episodes or periods of times of that, right?
Hmm.
And so, but then come out of it later. Again, the question I would have is, what is the quality of life of that person who is, you know, staying alone all the time? Are they taking care of themselves? Are they physically well? Are they eating? Are they sleeping? Is there some undiagnosed or unattended to, I should say, trauma as well? Have they ever in their life been given permission to be their own person or have their own identity? Is that something that this person would like to explore? You know,
Yeah.
some people don't, and some people are like, God, it would be so nice just to get to be me and feel free to be me and not have to censor myself. And some people want that support. Some people don't.
Mm.
Yeah,
It's just underscoring just how complex this issue is. You know, it,
absolutely.
it's not as simple as what some people may think.
That's right. So now we're going to look at some more subtle indicators. So, yearning for something more and having shifting values. So just feeling like, gosh, I know I should be happy with my life. I have a great life. I've got nothing to complain about, but there's this emptiness and this yearning. I can feel that there's something more for me, but I don't even know how to language it. So
Hmm.
there's different stages of this yearning where you may not, it's just a feeling of discontent. Okay. And again, that could be unattended trauma and unattended stress. It may not be a spiritual experience, but it is a subtle indicator. Feeling like they don't belong anymore and trying to
Hmm.
seek the truth. Like, I don't belong with the crowd anymore. And I don't even know if I know what the truth is, but I'm going to go try to find it. And I need to separate myself from people that I've been around or that I've known.
Mm.
An increase or decreased interest in sex. So the Kundalini can, for some people, be a very pleasurable experience. And as it's rising up the spine, it can be very orgasmic and they can have spontaneous whole body energy orgasms through the body, which may seem to some like that would be lovely, but it can be very distracting. And also, um, if somebody doesn't understand that they're going through a Kundalini awakening, then they may engage that impulse in a way that's not healthy.
Mhm.
Um, so, yeah, that's one that most people may not understand, and they don't want to talk about it. They may think, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm a sex addict. Why can't I stop having this feeling? What's wrong with me? Sensitivity to electronics and other physical symptoms. So spiritual experiencers have a tendency to short out electronics.
Right.
So grounding is really important, and being able to ground. Some people have to actually step away from their computers and step away from their phones and media. Some people have to actually, some people I know actually disconnect their modem at night so that they can get some rest.
Mm.
Depression. I'm sorry, Mark, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, when you were talking about grounding, I was sitting there thinking, oh, I'll stick my finger into the ground in the electric socket or something like that. And they have what is it, earthing, that
Yes.
where you actually do stick an electric plug into that third socket in an electric outlet, and you have a copper grid that you sleep on or whatever. But I didn't know that's not what you're talking about in terms of these sensitivities, because yeah, I've known people who have blown out light bulbs or who have caused all sorts of problems with audio boards and things like that.
That's right. I used to blow out light bulbs too. But what I realized in my early 20s, I was blowing out light bulbs and I couldn't wear a watch. I mean, my husband would buy
Mm.
me beautiful watches and they'd last for a few months. But what I also for myself discovered is um, that I had a lot of unattended trauma. I
Mhm.
had a lot of childhood trauma that was not attended to. And when I started therapy for trauma, and I started practicing deep breathing exercises and meditation, that helped disperse some of that energy. And then, of course, the psychological energy, the unhealed psychological energy, that discordant energy in my system was not interacting well, behaving well with the electronics.
Mhm.
And then I quit blowing up light bulbs, and I still don't wear watches because I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm not spending any more money on watches,
Right.
but I'm not blowing things up anymore either. And so that to me would be an indicator to check in with the stress levels of people and to find out what stress in their life has not been attended to well, and to support them in getting some attention to reducing their stress, whatever that stress might be. It doesn't have to be trauma.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And then depression. So we can be depressed for many reasons, but if there is this subtle spiritual emergence where you are slowly emerging into a broader understanding of life or having shifting values, and you don't have the identity to be able to live that out, then that in itself could
Mhm.
cause depression. And then, of course, being homesick for heaven. Anybody who's had a light filled experience or suffered the death of a loved one, or had a near death experience and in any way, whether it's a near death experience of their own or a shared death experience or a near death like experience, it's not uncommon to be homesick for heaven
Right.
and just want to go back.
I've heard that quite a bit from
Yeah.
near-death experiencers, and I don't know if any other people on the call have had that experience as well.
Yeah. And it is also a source, potential risk of suicide.
Mm.
I worked with a woman who attempted suicide. She wasn't depressed. She said, I was happy. Like, I was fine. For me, I was like, oh, I'm just ready to go home. I'm not sad. I'm not depressed. It's just time for me to go home. And I asked her, so when you woke up in the hospital, were you upset? How did you take it? She said, no, I figured like, oh, well, I guess I'm supposed to be here. And she really was okay with it, right? She was homesick, but she accepted that she needed to be here.
Right.
So Everybody handles it differently. Some other subtle indicators are addiction, again, because people are either trying to self-medicate the challenges that they're experiencing because of it. Usually that's probably that is what precipitates addiction. If they did not have addiction issues before the experience, it really can. Also, they could be chasing the experience. And so if they're missing that experience and they're homesick for that experience, or they just need the relief of having that another light-filled experience, it could put them at that risk, because what substances do is they shut down the analytical portion of our brain, and they bypass everything from egoic pride down to shame, and puts you in a higher state instantly. And it's an easy fix for apparently easy fix for depression. So it can cause addiction. Of course, we already talked about relationship problems, changes in religious affiliation or practices, that overwhelming sense of awe or gratitude or peace that we talked about. And it's so big that it's overwhelming. It's like so much love or so much awe that you can't even handle it. It's just too much. It's good, but it's like a lot to handle, very intense. And then giving away your money and belongings, because money is not important. So you just give everything away. And I've known people that have done that as well.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. So is there anything that you wanted to touch on there, Mark?
No, and just for the people on the call, I think this is a very comprehensive list of subtle indicators that, you know, you could see in people to tip you off that they could have had a spiritual experience that they aren't talking about. So I thank you for spending time going through that, because a lot of these things, I'd say more than half, I'd never thought of before. But, you know, it's good to be aware of it at least. So you can ask the question.
That's right. So you can ask the question. And I know this is really long, but we're just about done. So, so this is the typical support that's requested by experiencers. They want someone safe they can talk to. And what they're looking for is validation and understanding and support. They're not looking for you to analyze it, unless, of course, you're a professional and they're going to you for that. They want, but most people are not likely to go to a mental health professional because they're afraid they're going to get diagnosed with something. They want to know how and why it happened and what it means. So these are really common questions, like, was it real? Is this all just a dream? Am I God? Am I dead? Is this just am I making this up? Is this a construct of my mind being reflected back to me? Or even a construct of the collective unconscious or consciousness being reflected back to me? There's that real state of confusion, right? So they want to know, like, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And what does it mean? And what do I do now, right? So they want a community of people that understands them. Community is the number one thing people ask for.
Yeah, I was also going to say this is a big thing, especially for the people on the call. One of the things that I think is missing in the spiritual area is community, because you have a lot of disintegration in different cities around the country and even internationally. And if you have the opportunity to organize people, or to have a gathering at your house, a potluck dinner, or just to get together where people can talk, and you say in a safe space, you know, it's very important that you do that. And especially when people are going through these situations, they need people to talk to validate what they're feeling and what they're thinking. And they need people to just, like Elizabeth was just saying, just have somebody that they can talk to, because they can't talk to people that would understand. So if you have an opportunity to organize something where you live or in your community, please do so. And let us know so we can create an even bigger organization as well.
That's right. In our Hope community, we had a monthly potluck and safe place for people to share their experience. And we had 120 consecutive potlucks, a potluck every month for 10 years.
10 years.
And life-changing experiences for people. Yeah.
Well, and one thing too with the community and its importance is that you have to build trust with people for them to open up as well. And if you don't have that trust relationship, it's going to be harder for them to express their real selves or their real feelings. So having that interaction with people and building those relationships are just as important as having the organization put together.
That's right. And I didn't think about this until now, but I do have a community guide for people who are interested in starting local communities, because there are inherent challenges in these communities, and creating that safe space is a little harder than you might think.
Mm-hmm.
There's some subtle things that you need to pay attention to. Yeah.
I hope there's a recipe book that goes along with it.
There is. Yeah. I've got a little training book. So yeah. So some people want help to stop having the experience, as you've said as well, or to stop having the after effects of the experience. Or they want help to understand and master those changes that were caused by the experience. So if they have healing, I just talked to somebody today who has the gift of healing, and he's afraid of it. And he's like, am I God now? Am I God? Am I, how do I'm afraid of it. Like, how do I use this? Am I supposed to use it? Is there a wrong way to use it? So these are really common questions. They might need time and money to take time away from ordinary life to be with the experiences and to integrate it. And they want to know what to do with their life moving forward. So these are typical things that people ask for. So I talked earlier about, are you a spiritual friend or are you a professional? And how do you want to support people? Because there's different ways of doing it. And you don't have to be a professional. You can be a community organizer. You can be, lend your ear and be that safe space. But you also have to take care of yourself if you're going to do that. Professionals know how to take care of themselves when they're working with people with strong needs. But as a spiritual friend, it's a little harder because you don't have those professional boundaries. And there you may feel like more is expected of you, right? And so oftentimes for our spiritual friends might feel guilty if they don't engage enough, what they think might be enough for somebody. So we're going to talk about that. So a spiritual friend, you're informed, but you're not directive. You're not telling them what to do. You're not necessarily, you might give some advice on where to find support, but you wouldn't necessarily give them advice on, prescriptive advice. You'd be an empathic listener, right? Maybe ask some clarifying questions about the type of support they need. Ask them what they think this means. If they ask you, what does this mean? You can start by saying, what do you think this might mean for you?
Yeah. Right? And you have some resources on your website, elizabethjsabet.com. You have books and movies to, I guess, help raise awareness, but the books especially can help people, learn more things about what's going on, especially if they have no clue of what happened to them, and how to find people to talk to, different organizations that are out there. And so I think there's a lot of good resources that you have there for people who may be in need that may not want to express that on the call or on the YouTube channel, places to go.
Right. And also, Mark, I think I put in for you, and I don't know if you put it in the chat, I wrote a little guide, 3 things to consider when sharing your spiritual experience. If you want to put that in the chat, or I can put that in the chat later, but there's 2 pages of resources there. So I think it's good for whether you've had an experience or not. If you're going to be a spiritual friend helper, that's a really great way to help guide the conversation for people. And if you're an experiencer, I really do encourage you to read it. So some ways to help you more safely share about your experience and other things to take into consideration as well.
Good. And if it's a public link, I'll put it in the description on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a professional, then seek specialty training for your profession, and I'll share some information at the end. And do some targeted marketing. If you're going to support this community and become informed, then and you want to decide um, which type of experiencer you want to support, because you may not want to support somebody
Mhm.
who believes they're experiencing a possession. Okay,
Mhm.
remember, there's all sorts of experiences, and you may not want to support all of them. So knowing, do I want to support experiencers? Which experiencers do I want to support? And what do I want to learn about? And how am I going to get the word out to them? So you have to be willing to say out loud, hey, I'm supporting spiritual experiencers, or at least do some targeted marketing in the communities where these people hang out, so that they
Mhm.
know that where the resources are. Doing community outreach as a professional, doing speaking engagements in your local community, finding out if there's any pastors or ministers or priests that would allow you to do a workshop, um, would be great. And we'll get into more of what I call the religious wounding aspect in a
Mhm.
minute. And then offer some free sources and refer to other resources that you don't have, as well as your paid resources. So, as a spiritual friend, you want to be sure that you're taking care of if they come to you for help, that you support them in taking care of their immediate needs as best as you can without bypassing your own needs. Because sometimes experiencers' needs can be so great
Mm.
that you're not going to be able to support them and maintain your own wellness. So always feel into what is appropriate for you to do. So you want to observe for basic safety needs, all the physical, emotional, and mental. Do they have a safe and quiet place to stay? Do they need medical attention or evaluation? Like, could it possibly be something physical happening? Right? Like we were talking about the flashes of
Mhm.
light or hearing things. That could be neurological. And I always refer people, I always ask, have you had a neurological exam? Have you been to the doctor for this physical symptom? Because we don't want to go the opposite side and, you know, we don't want to just always assume that it's a spiritual experience or caused by a spiritual experience and then bypass their physical need. And then 2 years later, find out that they
Mhm.
have a neurological disorder, thinking that it was Kundalini.
Yeah.
So I've seen that happen as well.
Yeah.
Have they eaten, slept, or taken medications? Do they want to find a qualified mental health professional that's either trained or interested? Okay, interested in learning about it. Do they need help figuring out what to do next? Do they need financial aid? So, just helping them think through that first is really important. So, if you have that in mind, you could be that first line of defense from them ending up homeless. We had
Mhm.
several people in our Hope community over the years that were in such a high state of spiritual emergency that their spouse kicked them out, or they lost their business because of it, and they had no place to stay. And we had several people in the community who let people come live with them for a period of time until they could get integrated, and they didn't have to worry about, they were fed, they were housed, their basic needs were met.
Mm.
And so, I mean, like I said, our Hope community was very supportive. We had some really great spiritual angels in the community. So you want to have a list of resources that you can offer to share. Like I said, that handout, the
Mhm.
3 considerations on sharing your experience, will have 2 pages of resources there. Um, and give them a list of support organizations, and then see if they need financial aid. Usually the county will have financial aid. Every county usually has some sort of financial aid. So it's important as a spiritual friend not to label or diagnose. And here's a list of questions that you can ask. So sometimes it's hard to know what to say or what to ask. Um, but this is a good start. Okay. Um, so instead of judging or attempting to prove or disprove the experience, you want to there's really no way for them to prove to you that it happened because they can't go back into the experience and take you with them.
Mhm.
So what you can do, whether you're a spiritual friend or a professional, is you can validate that this was their experience. This was their experience, and this is how it affected them without having to get into, did this happen or not happen? That's something that they will come to as they begin to integrate the process.
Right.
So you sure, go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, for people who have had spiritual experiences and have spiritual abilities, what are your thoughts or recommendations on whether to try and explain things to people to say, oh, this is this or this is that? Is that something that you should do when you're talking to someone who's had a spiritual experience that doesn't really have an idea or a clue of what
It
had happened
depends.
to them?
Yeah. So we do not label a person's experience for them. So when we have had a similar experience to them, it's easy to say, oh, that's a near-death like experience. I had that too, and blah, blah, blah. Now, you don't want to label it for them. You can say, these experiences have quite a few different names.
Mhm.
And, we can get you some information so you can read through it to see what it feels like is right for you. In If you want, I could share about an experience that I had and what has helped me integrate or get steady around it, if that would be
Mhm.
helpful to you. And it may not be helpful to them right then, and it might be.
Right.
So there's a way to do it that doesn't take their meaning making autonomy away from them.
Right. And that was the point I was hoping you get to, is that it's their meaning for what happened to them too. And you can rob them of it. And I actually got that from you. I didn't get it from somebody else. I'm just parroting this back to you. But I felt like that was an important point, is
That's
that
right.
you can steal that whole experience from someone by just saying, oh, this is this or this is that. And that really made an impression on me. And I thought I'd share it with people.
Thank you. And so it's hard if you are a devotee of a specific religion to not want to bring in the religious aspect about what the religion says about that.
Mhm.
But in the beginning, this is not the time to do that, because especially if they're still concerned or scared, to introduce more shoulds and more fears is not helpful. It could actually really support them in spinning out into a
Right.
psychosis because of it.
Right.
So
And you're making me think that's what an artificial intelligence program would do, or be more apt to do.
this is what they're doing in some cases, and it's not helpful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so you can ask them. There's a lot that they're unsure about, but at
Mhm.
some point you can ask them, what are you more sure about now than you
Mhm.
were before the experience? So it helps give them something to hang on if they don't already have that.
That's good.
Yeah. So I'm not going to get into the professional, what you should do as a professional. All of these things as a spiritual friend are great for professionals. I encourage you to follow some of those guidelines. But to get training based on your profession is really important. If you're clergy, the Global Center for Religious Research has really good religious trauma training. If you want to if you're a spiritual friend, and you're not clergy, I think you can also take that training if you're interested. If you are a clinician, a mental health professional, the Center for Spiritual Emergence has great training. And like I said, Assist right now is not doing that. You can check the Assist website occasionally. It's www.ac, I forgot it,
I, Ace,
ACIST.
right. And I put it in the chat. So
Thanks.
it's
Yeah,
out
yeah,
there
yeah.
for people.
Yeah. And then the spiritual integration coaching. Now, spiritual emergence coaching that Emma Bragdon is doing is also excellent, but she's not teaching the actual coaching process. And so if you are wanting to become a coach, or you already are working as a coach in the coaching process, We do have a 7-month program for spiritual integration coach training, and it's for coaches, clinicians, and clergy that want to move into more of a support role. So if you're a therapist and you want to include coaching, you would, or a clergy that has already had pastoral counselor training, or a coach that has already had training that led to certification, then you could take the 7-month program. If you don't have any of those and you want to move from being a spiritual friend to a more professional helper, then you would take the longer program. If you're a spiritual friend that doesn't want to open up a coaching practice, then I think Emma Bragdon's spiritual emergence coaching program is probably a pretty good one. But if you want to have a coaching practice, then we have the longer program that would teach you how to be a transformational and transpersonal coach as well. So I am going to stop the share here and come back on.
Okay. And before we leave the ITTC program, what's the website for the transformational and transpersonal coaching?
It's ittccoachtraining.com. And in the handout that I gave you with the notes, with the slides, with the notes, all of those should have a link attached to them too. But
Okay.
here, let me put it in the chat.
Yeah. And ITTC has a spiritual integration coaching class coming up in June. Is that when?
In July.
Or in July it starts. Okay.
Yep.
So there you go. So I'd like to open the floor up for questions. If anyone has a question about what Elizabeth has talked about, any particular area that she went over that you'd like some more information about, now's the time to ask. And Daniel, you're first. Daniel Indy.
Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello.
That was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I've found myself in those situations fairly often, advising folks and assisting folks in understanding, or at least listening to their experience, sometimes when they've been invalidated by other people in their lives, which is sad. And occasionally when they've had very challenging aspects. I've got a whole bunch of questions. Let's run through a couple, perhaps quickly. Sure. Religious trauma. How would you define religious trauma briefly?
It causes a crisis of faith, and it can happen in many different ways. And we know that it happens when people are told that they're going to hell because they've had their spiritual experience. It can be because they've been exploited or betrayed or abused by a spiritual authority in the church. It can be that their sense of beingness or wholeness has been dismissed by leadership in the church, where they've been shamed in front of the church.
Got it. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. I've noticed in terms of trauma that many, if not most or all of the near-death experiencers have that homesickness trauma, that they're like both, they don't want to be here and they feel guilty that they didn't want to be here, and they were ready to leave their loved ones behind.
Yes.
You didn't mention it, but I believe there's a category of spiritual emergence which can lead to illness. That is, that there's something in the spiritual advancement that causes their bodies to react poorly, or for them to sort of purge certain energies. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So oftentimes in the Kundalini awakening, where the energy is running through the body, It's considered, Gopi Krishna called it like a spiritual housekeeping, where the energy is going through the body and it's clearing up the stuck spaces, the stuck energies in the body. And that can actually bring up all sorts of physical, emotional, and mental illnesses. Yeah.
Precisely. Thank you.
Mhm.
And the disorganized speech part, um, I know somebody who often speaks in non sequiturs and switches gears, and it's hard to follow them. You're saying that can be a symptom of a spiritual experience.
It's possible. Yeah.
Okay. And the last one, I would just want to say, you are the first person to use a phrase that I've used, which is, what would love do? And I want to thank you for that. That is an awesome question. It is my go-to question. And
Yay.
also, I advise folks to ask for help from the spiritual side, from angels, archangels, guardians, you name it, whatever you want to call it, ask for help. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I do too. I don't live without mine. I thank my guardian angel every night and every morning. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. You're next.
So first and foremost, I want to thank you for having me open up this space and allowing there to be conversation about spiritual emergencies. I went to someone and they kind of enlightened me that it's something that I experienced in my childhood may have been a spiritual emergency, or rather a spiritual emergence. And so I want to thank you for opening up this space so that I can like reopen up some of those experiences and the challenges that came with them and kind of heal some of those traumas. And so again, to you. So with that, I have a question, and I ask it because it would be great for me, but I also feel like it's something that I feel like if expanded on, it would be great for a lot of people who are currently watching as well. I think my answer to this question may lie somewhere within one of the characteristics or symptoms of the emergence that you spoke of, depression, and maybe within that area. But for me, it wasn't that depressive. It was just like a sense. And that sense that I'm speaking of is a sense of helplessness and a sense of like, there's no possible way that anyone could possibly understand what I've gone through. So I might as well just like keep it to myself. Like there's no reason to like seek anything because it seems so far out that there's not many people, if at all, who have had, I mean, maybe some, but you know, the sense, there's not really anyone who's had that sort of experience. And that's something that I experienced where I just kind of just went through life and kind of just let my guides help me where I can and experiences. But I didn't feel like there was any reason for me to even mention it to anyone because it's like there's no possible way anyone knows how to interpret this or that there's no one who actually went through this experience because it just seems so unique.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. And unfortunately, that is a common experience for people to feel totally helpless and often hopeless, that there's any help or support out there for them. How are you now? How have you been able to be with that helplessness?
I'm a lot better. It's actually interesting. So with that hopelessness came a sense of an understanding that for me to get past it, I couldn't do it by myself. And so I developed the sense of a need for community and to just reach out. And so that helplessness has been replaced hope, with hope in community and hope in people understanding what I went through. So I'm a lot better with it.
That's good. How long did you live with that helplessness?
Let's see. About 12, almost 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
happened when I was
sorry.
a child. Yeah.
And how did that affect your life overall, do you think?
Um, it's interesting because one thing that you said that spoke to me is how a lot of times this happens when the soul has ripened. And the energy that came with the word ripen kind of reminded me of something that I think I may have felt before it actually happened when I was a child, kind of like a check mark, you know, like you're ripened. And so The question was, how do I feel? How do I feel it basically? I see what you're asking, kind of how has it impacted me since then?
Yeah.
Um, I think I think what it did was it opened my mind and it opened my energetic body to the possibility of anything happening. Like, or more specifically, anything being possible. Because what
I
it did
see.
was it blew me apart with the idea of there's no way that that happened. Um,
Mm,
and it wasn't just in terms of as like the perception of an experience. It was with like physical possibilities. It was with like how the world is laid, how I believe the world is laid, and how things aren't supposed to happen, like physically speaking. Like there's no way that could have happened, but it did. And so with that, I feel like it blew me apart in a way that I'm learning to piece back together. I kind of just was like, there's no way that happened, but it did. And so I think over my journey, I've been becoming comfortable with just things just like happening, like in ways that seem almost just like sci-fi magical. Like it's, yeah. So
you're becoming acclimated to a whole new existence, it sounds like.
yes, I have. And the acclimation has been a fun process. Like it hasn't been like an emergency for me. Like there hasn't really been moments other than just like other than like the moments where it's like I feel like I'm in a box because I'm becoming acclimated to something bigger. So it's like the two consciousnesses are kind of like battling each other, where it's like a
Yeah.
sense of infinity and a sense of like complete and utter capability matched with this sense of I'm not there yet. And so I feel a little stuck with where I am. But that sense has since faded, and I feel more so like I can really feel I've reached a point of equilibrium between the sense of stuckness and the sense of expansiveness. And so I feel more like I'm just going forward. And so I mean, I can't help but say it has added a huge like essence to my life. Like it's added a huge just like, I don't know, like an extra something new. So I mean, I am glad that it happened. Everything is a process, and everything might not be completely easy up front. But I think once I continue living my life here and then go on to the next life as well, and the next one, I'll begin to realize just how transformative and positive that event for me was.
That's beautiful. You just so eloquently described that feeling of being expansive and yet being not able to exist in it yet, and the experience of the dichotomy of the awareness of both. So thank you so much for that beautiful description. There are other communities out there. This is an amazing community that Mark and Jim and Daniel and others have created here for us. And then there's the Assist Forum. Thank you for reminding me, Mark. If anybody here is interested in joining the Assist Experiencer Forum, it's all online. It's not video, it's just all chatting. But it's run by moderators that moderate the conversation. You can go to, and I'll put their email address here. Let's see. So you would just email info@assist.org and let them know that you want to get approved to get into the forum. It usually takes 2 or 3 weeks to get approved, depending on how many people are wanting to get signed up at one time. But yeah, I would encourage you to take a look at the Assist forum as well, because it's so nice to be able to talk with people who specifically had that same experience.
Yeah.
Thank you, Isaiah.
How long has the Assist Experiencer Forum been active?
Oh, let's see. You had to ask me that question.
I'm sorry.
My memory is just like, it's been open since 2012 or 2013.
Okay. And there's people from all over the world who have had spiritual experiences who are on that forum, and they talk
That's right.
about all the things that happened to them.
That's right.
Yeah. So and yeah, I'm on it. I've not been active on it lately, but you can get a lot of comments on questions and thoughts and experiences you've had, and that would be a great place to go, I think.
That's right. And there's a lot of resources that are on there as well. Videos people have posted, books people have posted. There's a lot of resources in the forum as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment? I know Elizabeth covered an awful lot of ground, and we thank you for it. Because I mean, we really wanted actually a video to have on the linked on the Consciousness Cafe website to talk about spiritual experiences. So I think this is going to be it. And it really did you really did do a great job helping us out with this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate. I love to talk about this. So
yeah, and Daniel, you've got your hand up one more time.
Yeah. Elizabeth, can you talk a little bit about the 988 crisis talk line, also perhaps known as a suicide hotline?
the suicide hotline. Yeah. So if you are having a spiritual emergency to the point where you can't take it anymore, it's now 988, right?
Yes.
And yeah, 988. And you really don't have to suffer alone. And these hotlines may or may not be educated on spiritual emergence or emergency, but they're not going to tell you that your experience didn't happen. They are there to support you and to help you get through that transition. And if you are suicidal, and I do understand what that is like, I experienced suicidal ideation myself. I really wanted to die. I was trying to find a way to do it. I really do understand. But an informed mental health professional can really help you with that. And in the chat, I put a guide from ASSIST, the ASSIST competency guidelines for professionals. I encourage everyone to click on that link, to download it. And if you are an experiencer that would like to go seek mental health assistance, take that guide with you, email it to your therapist, see if they're willing and interested in learning more about spiritual emergence and emergency. You can send us to the suicide hotline. You can read it to them and tell them what's going on. But please do use these resources. And then again, the other resource that I linked on 3 things to consider when sharing your experience. There's no reason to go through this alone.
Yeah. Let me point out, unfortunately, you posted the same link twice. It was both.
Oh, darn. Which one got posted?
The competency guidelines did not get posted.
They did not get posted. Okay, let me pull that back up.
And while you're doing that, I wanted to ask if you could say a little more about the experiences working with people who feel they're possessed.
Yeah, so I've had a great deal of experience of working with attempted possession and possession cases. It's not something I seek out. It's dangerous work, and I prefer not to have to do it, but I will, under most circumstances, do that type of work. But you know, people who have gone through trauma, people who are going through depression for any reason, there are, unfortunately, we don't like to talk about it because it scares people, but for those that are suffering and believe that they are experiencing a possession or an attempted possession, there is help to take care of that. And what I encourage people to do is to look for, if you're interested, and it depends on your faith too. If you're Catholic, there are priests trained in depossession, and I would encourage you to go to a Catholic priest. If you are not religiously oriented, I would encourage you to go to, and I'll put it in the chat, shamanism.org. That is Michael Harner's organization. And they train shamanic practitioners, and there are shamanic practitioners listed by state on that website that you could contact to see if they would help you with that work, and they are trained. And so working with someone who's trained is really important, because you have to know what to do with them. I mean, not every possession is a deep, bad, dark satanic or demonic entity. It could be a lost soul, and they have to be handled differently than a satanic or a demonic or a dark force energy.
Yeah, I think staying away from fear is key. So I appreciate what you said about not spreading fear. You bring up another question. How do you define shamanism?
Shamanic practices are used by traditional tribes all over the world, and ways of connecting with the nonlinear, the transpersonal, that are not typical therapy practices. So there are many different types of shamanic practices. You can journey for someone into the underworld. You can I'll do all sorts of medicine work. But again, I encourage people to go to shamanism.org if they're interested in somebody to help them with the shamanic practice to release blocked energy or entities, for somebody that has high quality training. I've been doing this work for a very, very long time, almost 58. So like 45 years I've been doing this work. And I decided, I should probably get trained, and heard about Michael Harner's organization. And the majority of the people in that training were mental health professionals, clinicians, and therapists. So many professionals are now including some of these practices and developing the sensitivities that a shaman might have in their mental health profession, their mental health practice.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Jim Fisher. And Jim, you'll be the last one, and we'll close after this, because it's getting close to 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock Central Time.
It's very late. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I have a couple questions. One, it seems that there are a lot more podcasts and information out there about these types of experiences. Do you think that as this information proliferates, the degree of difficulty that people will have when they're exposed to their own experiences will be reduced? Think back on your experience. Had you known about the fact that these things existed, might that have made your experience a little less edgy?
Well, that's interesting. I would say it may and it may not. I was raised Catholic. I'm very grateful I was raised Catholic, because they are respectful of communication with the saints and angels, and understand that there is nonlinear communication that occurs. But that being said, for some of the experiences that I had, just knowing that they did happen didn't necessarily prevent the challenges. I was still blowing up light bulbs. I was still scared in some of my experiences. And the integration process, I didn't know, I never heard of Kundalini. I started doing deep breathing to help myself ground, and meditation when I was 23, but I had no teacher. It was Lubbock, Texas, in the 1980s. You didn't talk about these things. And so, I think that what these podcasts are doing is they're normalizing that they're happening. And it can be very disruptive to be on a podcast And I've been on some, and some of the responses, they're not kind. There's a lot of trolls out there that they just like to spew hatred and disgust and whatever, or they will put biblical references as to why this is bad or wrong. And so when people go on these podcasts, again, it's really important to remember that they're opening themselves up to potential ridicule. And I would just encourage people to not read. If you are going to be a guest on some of these podcasts, just don't read the responses, because they may not be nice if the moderator doesn't remove them. But they are helpful in normalizing. And I love listening to near-death experiences. And I can find them very uplifting and encouraging. And so I think they're very helpful. But they are normalizing these experiences. But I don't know that they will always assist in the integration process. It can, and it may, and it may not.
The second question is, on all the years you've been involved in this, are you finding in recent years that there's a greater frequency of these happening? And we talk about there being an awakening that's going on. Might this, if there is a greater frequency of people having experiences, maybe that's offers some statistical support for the notion that there is an awakening going on.
Yeah, I would agree. I do think that it's not just because there are more places to talk about these experiences that we're, being honest when we're being told about it. I do believe that we are. I will say we started the Hope Community in 2007. And in 2012, whatever happened, I think there was something that happened with the sun in 2012 for sure. But whatever happened in 2012, whatever that was, we had people come out of the woodwork. 2012, 2013, we had exponential growth in our community. And it just grew and grew and grew. And so, yes, I do believe we are in a renaissance of awakening for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I'd like to thank Elizabeth on behalf of all the Consciousness Cafe attendees. And Elizabeth, this has been a great presentation. I think it's been very enlightening, and the awareness building you've given us on spiritual emergencies, I've never had that before to the extent that you have. And I thank you very much for doing that for us.
Thank you. I know it was long, but thanks for everybody for sticking it out. And I'm so grateful to get to present to you, and hope that you've got lots of resources now that you can use to support yourselves and each other and other experiencers as they come into your community.
Thank you. It was very beneficial. So thank you. And thanks to everyone for hanging in there with us, and for being with us here on the Consciousness Cafe. I think the next event, Jim, is going to be April 11th.
That's right. Is that my opportunity to do a little promotion?
Yeah, if you want, and then we'll go.
Just momentarily. I'm going to be speaking about something that arises with some degree of regularity in my life. I meet people who've had after-death communications. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about some interesting research into induced after-death communications. If anybody's had such an experience, I'd love to have you participate and share it with us.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks, everyone, for being here with us this evening on the Consciousness Cafe. Take care and have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.